Fort Hood, Texas, April 17th, 2023. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Fort Hood as Colonel James Garrison stood before a classroom of young officers. At 58, his weathered face told stories that his words could only hint at. 3 decades of desert sand, tank grease, and battlefield decisions had etched permanent lines around his eyes. The soldiers called him Iron Jim behind his back, and sometimes to his face, a nickname earned during the Gulf War when he refused to abandon his damaged Abrams, even as enemy fire rained down around him. "Gentlemen, the decision to engage is never just about the target," Jim said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "It is about what comes after, who lives, who dies, what you can live with when you look in the mirror 20 years later." The young lieutenants watched him with the quiet reverence reserved for men who had seen what they had only trained for. Jim moved across the front of the classroom, his limp barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. A souvenir from Fallujah, 2004. A sharp knock interrupted the lecture. Staff Sergeant Miller stepped in, his expression conveying urgency before his words could. "Colonel Garrison, sir, General Davidson needs you in his office immediately." Jim checked his watch. 15 minutes left in the lecture. He never left a class unfinished in 17 years of teaching. His eyes swept across the faces of the men and women who would soon command America's armored divisions. "Remember what I said about battlefield ethics? They matter most when they cost you something." He gathered his notes. "Class dismissed. Think about what that means before we meet on Thursday." The walk to Major General Robert Davidson's office took Jim past the parade grounds where M1 Abrams tanks stood in perfect formation, their massive hulls gleaming in the Texas sun. These were the descendants of the machines he had commanded in combat, now faster, smarter, deadlier. Yet in the field, they broke down just the same. They got stuck in the same mud. They ran out of fuel at the same critical moments. Some things technology couldn't fix. General Davidson stood as Jim entered, waving away the salute. They had known each other too long for formalities in private. Davidson's office walls displayed the expected military honors alongside unexpected touches, photos of Arabian horses that Davidson bred on his ranch outside Killeen. "Jim, sorry to pull you from class. Those kids need the hours more than I need to hear myself talk," Jim replied, easing into the chair across from Davidson. His knee throbbed, barometer dropping, storm coming. Davidson pushed a folder across his desk, classified markings prominent on its cover. "The Pentagon called this morning. They want you to lead a special project, high priority, $31 million budget." Jim left the folder untouched. "Bob, I filed my retirement papers last month, effective July. Emily's wedding is in August. Sarah and I have plans." Davidson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. 35 years is enough sacrifice for any man. But this comes from the top, and they specifically requested you." Jim finally opened the folder. Inside were specifications, timelines, budget allocations, Operation Lazarus. He skimmed the executive summary, key phrases jumping out at him. Mobile repair units, forward deployment, Bradley fighting vehicles. "They want to revolutionize how we handle battlefield repairs," Davidson explained. "Instead of shipping damaged vehicles back to distant depots, they want teams that can assess and repair them near the front, turn months of downtime into days." Jim closed the folder. "The concept isn't new, Bob. We've talked about this since Desert Storm. Pentagon brass never wanted to fund it. They do now, and they want you to make it happen." Jim stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the tank training grounds. Below, a column of Bradleys rumbled past, kicking up dust clouds that danced in the afternoon light. "Why me? I'm a tank commander, not a logistics specialist." Davidson moved to stand beside him at the window. "Because you've been fighting for this concept since 1991. Because you know what happens when a vehicle breaks down in hostile territory and there's no way to fix it quickly." He paused, the weight of unspoken history hanging between them. "And because no one else has your credibility with both the brass and the enlisted mechanics." Jim's mind drifted back to that day in the Iraqi desert, February 26, 1991. The charred remains of the Bradley, Thomas Reed's face the last time he saw him alive. The promise he had made at Arlington 3 weeks later. "I'm retired in 3 months, Bob. Find someone else." "They're calling it the Rapid Armor Repair Initiative," Davidson continued, ignoring Jim's protest. 18-month development cycle. If it works, it gets implemented across all combat theaters. That's not enough time, which is why they need you. Davidson returned to his desk, pulled another file from his drawer, There's something else you should see. He handed Jim a deployment order. Jim scanned it quickly, his heart sinking as he read the name. Captain Michael Reed, Commander. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment. Deployment to classified location, November 2023. Thomas's boy, Jim said quietly. He's commanding a Bradley unit now, one of our best young officers. Jim stared at the paper, seeing not the orders, but the face of a small boy at his father's funeral, clutching a folded American flag. The Pentagon doesn't know about your history with his father, Davidson said. This landed on my desk through regular channels. The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of engines on the training ground. Jim set the deployment order on Davidson's desk. When do they need my answer? They don't need an answer, Jim. They need you in Washington for the project kickoff on Monday, April 24, 23, Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. The conference room overlooked the Potomac, morning light dancing off the water as Colonel James Garrison studied the faces around the table. 5 people who would help determine whether Operation Lazarus succeeded or failed. 5 people who didn't yet know they were a team. Lieutenant General William Stanton sat at the far end, his 3 stars gleaming under the fluorescent lights. At 60, Stanton was the epitome of the old guard, West Point class of '85, decorated combat veteran, now head of Logistics and Transportation Command. His perfectly pressed uniform and rigid posture broadcast his message before he ever opened his mouth. I follow regulations to the letter, and so will you. To Stanton's right sat Master Sergeant Hank Wilson, a barrel-chested NCO with calloused hands and skeptical eyes. Jim had specifically requested him. They had served together in Iraq, and Jim had never met a better battlefield mechanic. If anyone could tell you why a tank wouldn't run just by listening to the engine, it was Hank. Dr. Eleanor Martinez examined the technical specifications before her, occasionally pushing her glasses up her nose as she made notations in the margins. Formerly Captain Martinez of the Corps of Engineers, she had transitioned to the private sector after her husband's death in Iraq in 2007. Now Rheinmetall's lead engineer, she brought both military experience and cutting-edge technical knowledge. Beside her, Lieutenant Layla Washington reviewed data on her tablet. Fresh from MIT with a dual doctorate in mechanical engineering and computer science, she represented the new generation of military technology specialists. Her inclusion had raised Stanton's eyebrows, but her thesis on mobile diagnostic systems for armored vehicles had caught the attention of someone high up the chain. And finally, slouching in his chair, with deliberate casualness, Sergeant First Class Jake Sullivan, 3 Purple Hearts from Afghanistan, expert on Bradley systems, problem solver, problem maker. His service record contained equal parts commendation and disciplinary action. Let's begin, Jim said, standing at the head of the table. General Stanton has graciously agreed to oversee our progress, but day-to-day operations will fall to this team. Jim activated the wall screen, displaying images of Bradley fighting vehicles in various states of damage. The Bradley M2A2 is the backbone of our mechanized infantry. When one breaks down in combat, current protocol requires transport back to regional maintenance depots. Average time from breakdown to return to service, 73 days. He clicked to the next slide, a map showing deployment regions with maintenance facilities highlighted. In a major conflict, this creates a critical vulnerability. Units lose fighting capability for months. Transport convoys become targets, and soldiers are left exposed while waiting for replacements. Stanton cleared his throat. A system that has served us adequately for decades, Colonel. With respect, General, adequate costs lives. Jim's voice remained even, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Our mission is to develop, test, and implement a new approach. Mobile repair units capable of diagnosing and fixing combat-damaged vehicles within days, not months. Units that can operate near the front lines in austere conditions with minimal support. He distributed folders to each team member. Operation Lazarus, $31 million, 18 months. At the end, we deliver a working prototype system and training program, or the project dies. Sullivan flipped through the specs, whistling softly. Ambitious timeline, sir, which is why I selected each of you. Jim looked at each team member in turn. De Martinez brings the engineering expertise. Lieutenant Washington, the diagnostic technology. Sergeant Wilson and Sergeant Sullivan know how these machines break and how to fix them under fire. And what do you bring, Colonel? Stanton asked, challenge evident in his tone. Jim met his gaze steadily. The experience of watching good men die because their vehicle couldn't be repaired in time, and the determination not to let that happen again. The room fell silent. Jim let the moment stretch, then continued with the briefing, outlining project phases, deliverables, and the formidable challenges ahead. For 2 hours, they dissected the technical requirements, budget constraints, and deployment scenarios. As the meeting concluded, Stanton remained seated while the others filed out. Jim knew what was coming. "You've been pushing this concept since Desert Storm Garrison," Stanton said once they were alone. "Commanders with more stars than both of us combined have determined it's logistically unsound." Jim gathered his notes. "Times change, General. Technology changes. People don't." Stanton stood, adjusting his uniform jacket. "This project has failure written all over it. I've seen the Pentagon chase pipe dreams before. Millions wasted that could have gone to proven systems. Is that why you've agreed to oversee us? To ensure we fail?" Stanton smiled thinly. "I've agreed to oversee you because I was ordered to. But make no mistake, I'll be establishing stringent milestones. Miss one and I'll recommend immediate termination." Jim watched the general leave, then turned to the window. Across the Potomac, he could see Arlington National Cemetery in the distance. Somewhere among those endless white markers lay Thomas Reed, along with too many others whose lives might have been saved by the very system Jim was now tasked with building. "Not this time," he whispered to the cemetery. "Not again." April 30th, 2023. Rain Metal Research Facility, Manassas, Virginia. The prototype diagnostic unit sat on the workbench, a jumble of sensors, processors, and rugged casing that would eventually become the brain of their mobile repair system. Art Martinez adjusted a connection while Lieutenant Washington monitored readings on her laptop. "The environmental hardening is still inadequate," Ellie said, frustration evident in her voice. "These sensors need to function in dust storms, freezing conditions, and under fire. Right now, they're struggling with a light mid." Layla nodded, fingers dancing across her keyboard. "What if we adapt the housing from the drone targeting systems? They're rated for extreme conditions." Jim watched from the doorway, taking in the scene before making his presence known. 1 week in, and his team had already established their rhythm. Ellie and Layla formed the technical core, translating battlefield needs into engineering solutions. Hank and Jake brought practical expertise, constantly testing theories against hard-won experience. "Morning, Colonel," Hank called out, spotting Jim first. The master sergeant was elbow-deep in a Bradley transmission, salvaged from a training accident at Fort Benning. "Come see what Jake figured out about the cooling system failures." Jim joined them, listening as Jake explained his discovery, a design flaw that became critical under certain combat conditions. The sergeant's hands were stained with grease as he pointed out components, his technical knowledge belying his reputation as a disciplinary problem. "If we modify this junction and add a secondary bypass here," Jake concluded, "we reduce failure rates by 60%, and it can be done in the field with basic tools." "Good work," Jim nodded. "Document it for the repair manual. I want every quick fix, every field expedient solution you have ever used or heard about." "Even the unofficial ones, sir?" Jake asked with a hint of challenge. "Especially those," Jim replied. "This isn't about military regulations. It's about keeping vehicles running and soldiers alive." Jim moved through the facility, checking progress across different workstations. The first phase focused on diagnostic capabilities, developing systems that could quickly identify damage and prioritize repairs. The concept seemed straightforward, but the execution was proving difficult. "Colonel Garrison," Layla called from her station, "I think you should see this." She displayed combat data from the recent training exercises, focusing on Bradley failure patterns. "I've been running simulations based on likely combat scenarios. Even with our system, there's a critical vulnerability in the power distribution that we can't fix in the field." Jim studied the data. "How many failures would fall into that category?" "Based on historical data, approximately 8%. That means we could potentially return 92% of disabled vehicles to service near the front," Jim noted. "Currently, we return 0. I'll take those odds." A technician appeared at the door. "Colonel, you have a visitor, General Stanton." The team exchanged glances. Stanton wasn't scheduled to review their progress for another 3 weeks. Jim found the general in the main conference room, examining the project timeline displayed on the wall. "General, we weren't expecting you today." "Clearly," Stanton replied, gesturing to Jim's casual attire. "No uniform today, just khakis and a button-down. I prefer unscheduled inspections. They reveal the truth rather than the presentation." And what truth are you looking for today? Whether this project is worth the resources being diverted from proven systems. Stanton handed Jim a folder. The first round of Pentagon evaluation metrics. You'll need to demonstrate measurable progress against these benchmarks by June 15th. Jim scanned the document, his expression darkening. This timeline is impossible. We've barely begun component testing. Then perhaps the concept isn't as viable as you've claimed, Stanton said smoothly. $31 million could upgrade our existing depot system, improve transport aircraft, buy spare parts we desperately need. We both know that's not where the money would go. Stanton's expression hardened. Be careful, Colonel. You're approaching insubordination. I'm approaching honesty, General. Something this project needs more of. Jim closed the folder. We'll meet your metrics, but I want something in return. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Access to the after-action reports from the 66th Armor Regiment's last 3 training cycles. All maintenance records, all failure incidents. Stanton's eyes narrowed. Why that unit specifically? Jim held his gaze. Because they're deploying with Bradleys in November, and their commander is Captain Michael Reed. A flicker of recognition crossed Stanton's face. Reed? Any relation to Major Thomas Reed? His son. The room fell silent as decades-old memories surfaced between them. Stanton had been a lieutenant colonel during Operation Desert Storm, commanding the logistics battalion that should have supported Thomas Reed's company. Those reports are classified, Stanton finally said. You have the clearance to authorize access. Stanton studied Jim for a long moment. You believe this project could have saved Reed and his men. I know it would have. That's emotional thinking, not strategic assessment. It's both, Jim countered. Every vehicle we can return to service quickly represents American lives preserved. You understand that better than most. Stanton turned to leave, pausing at the door. I'll consider your request, Colonel. In the meantime, focus on meeting those benchmarks. This project won't survive sentiment alone. After Stanton departed, Jim stood alone in the conference room, memories washing over him like desert heat. February 26, 1991. The frantic radio calls. The Bradley disabled by enemy fire. Transmission destroyed. Thomas and his crew stranded in hostile territory. The agonizing hours before support could reach them. Too late. At Thomas's funeral, Jim had made a promise to his friend's widow and 5-year-old son, a promise that such a preventable tragedy would never happen again. For 30 years, he had pushed the concept of forward repair units through official channels, only to be stymied by budget constraints and institutional inertia. Now finally he had his chance. But with Stanton actively working against them, the odds of success seemed suddenly much longer. May 10, 2023, Arlington National Cemetery. The morning mist clung to the endless rows of white markers as Jim made his way through the cemetery. He knew the path by heart, had walked it dozens of times over the decades. Section 60, Row 14, Stone 22. Major Thomas Reed, United States Army, 1961-1991. Beloved husband, father, soldier. Jim stood before the grave, the damp grass soaking through his shoes. He came here when decisions weighed heavily, when he needed clarity. Today he needed both. The project's in trouble before it's really begun, Tom, he said quietly. Stanton's determined to kill it. The technical challenges are bigger than we anticipated, and I don't know if 18 months is enough. From a nearby tree, a cardinal called, the bright sound cutting through the somber atmosphere. Jim smiled faintly. Your boy's doing well. Made captain faster than you did. Commands a Bradley company now. Jim's voice caught. He's deploying in November. Same vehicles, same vulnerabilities. History repeating itself. Jim knelt, brushing leaves from the base of the headstone. I made you a promise here, all those years ago. Said I'd fix the system that failed you. Now I finally have the chance. But he trailed off, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. What if I fail, Tom? What if I can't make this work in time? Only silence answered him, the question hanging unanswered in the morning air. Jim stood, knees protesting the damp ground. Colonel Garrison? Jim turned to find a young man in army dress uniform standing a respectful distance away. Captain's bars gleamed on his shoulders. Though it had been years since Jim had seen him, he would have recognized Michael Reed anywhere. He had his father's eyes, his father's bearing. Michael, Jim said, extending his hand. I didn't know you were in town. Just overnight. Meetings at the Pentagon. Michael shook Jim's hand firmly, then looked past him to his father's grave. Mom called, said she saw you last week. Told me about your new project. They stood side by side, two generations of soldiers united by the absence between them. Dad used to talk about you in his letters home, Michael said. Said you were the best tank commander in the regiment. Said if he ever got in real trouble, he hoped you'd be the one coming to get him out. Jim felt the familiar stab of guilt. I tried, Michael. We all did. I know. Mom made sure I understood what happened. That's why I requested Bradley command. Thought maybe I could help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Jim studied the young captain, seeing Thomas in the set of his jaw, the determination in his eyes. That's why I took this project. Same reason. Michael nodded toward the headstone. Think he'd be proud of both of us? I know he would. Jim paused. Your unit's deploying in November. The Lazarus project won't be ready by then. But it will be ready someday, for someone. Michael checked his watch. I have to get back to the Pentagon. My flight to Benning leaves at 1400. Jim hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him since he saw Michael's name on the deployment orders. Your company's headed somewhere hot, isn't it? Not just a routine rotation to Korea or Germany. Michael's expression confirmed it before his careful words did. Let's just say we're training for conditions similar to where Dad served. Be careful out there. Always am, sir. Michael saluted his father's grave, then turned to Jim. Mom said to tell you that you're welcome for dinner anytime you're near Atlanta. She'd like to hear about the project. As Michael walked away, Jim turned back to Thomas's grave, a new determination settling over him. The cardinal called again from its perch, and Jim smiled. I hear you, Tom, loud and clear. May 15, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. The Bradley's engine roared to life, black smoke belching from the exhaust as systems powered up. Jake Sullivan gave a thumbs up from the driver's compartment. Transmission engaging normally, he called out. No warning lights. Hank Wilson monitored the diagnostic display, nodding with satisfaction. Power distribution nominal. Cooling system online. Jim watched from the observation platform alongside Dr. Martinez and Lieutenant Washington. This was the first full system test of their modified diagnostic equipment, installed on a Bradley that had been deliberately damaged in 3 key areas, then repaired using their prototype procedures. 30% faster diagnosis time, Layla noted, checking the data streaming to her tablet, and the repair guidance system correctly identified all major issues. Ellie pointed to a secondary display. The parts inventory management is working too. System automatically requisitioned the exact components needed, prioritized by urgency. The Bradley moved forward, executing a series of maneuvers around the test track. Each turn, each acceleration, testing different aspects of the repairs. Jake pushed the vehicle hard, testing the limits of their work. This is promising, Jim said, allowing himself a moment of optimism. If we can consistently replicate these results under field conditions, we might actually make this work. We still need to ruggedize everything, Ellie cautioned. The diagnostic unit works here in a controlled environment, but in dust storms, under fire, that's another challenge entirely. Jim nodded. That's phase 2, but this proves the concept is sound. The test concluded successfully, the Bradley performing to specifications despite its previously damaged systems. As the team gathered to review the data, a staff sergeant appeared at Jim's side. Sir, you have a call from General Davidson at Fort Hood. He says it's urgent. Jim found a quiet office and took the call, immediately concerned by Davidson's grave tone. There's been an incident, Jim. Training exercise at Fort Benning yesterday. Bradley from the 66th overturned during a night maneuver. 4 injured, 1 critical. Jim's heart sank. Michael Reed? Yes, he's being airlifted to Walter Reed right now. Spinal injuries, internal bleeding. The room seemed to tilt around Jim. How bad? Bad enough. Doctors aren't making promises. Davidson paused. There's more. Initial reports suggest a mechanical failure. Same transmission issue you've been studying? Jesus Christ. Jim closed his eyes, the cruel irony crushing down on him. I need to get to Walter Reed. Already arranged. There's a military transport leaving Andrews in 90 minutes. Car waiting for you outside Rheinmetall now. Jim thanked him and hung up, leaning heavily against the desk. Thomas Reed had died when his Bradley couldn't be repaired in the field. Now his son lay critically injured from the same fundamental problem, 30 years later. When Jim emerged from the office, Ellie took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. Colonel, I have to go to Washington. Captain Reed was injured in a Bradley accident yesterday. Critical condition. Her hand went to her mouth. Oh God, Jim, I'm so sorry. I need you to take over while I'm gone. Push forward with the environmental testing. Don't let Stanton derail anything. She nodded. Of course, go. As Jim headed for the exit, Jake fell in step beside him. Sir, permission to come with you. Jim glanced at him, surprised. Why, Sullivan? Because I served with a Captain Reed in Afghanistan before he took command of Charlie Company. He's a good man, and because I think I know what happened to his Bradley. Jim studied the sergeant, seeing the genuine concern beneath his typically nonchalant exterior. Grab your gear. Car leaves in 5. May 16, 23. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. The ICU waiting room was painted in soothing blues and greens that did nothing to mask its essential purpose. A place where families waited to learn if their loved ones would live or die. Jim sat with Rebecca Reed, Thomas's widow, now faced with the prospect of losing her son to the same flawed system that had taken her husband. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Spinal surgery went well, but there's swelling they're concerned about. Jim nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Down the hall, Michael Reed lay surrounded by medical equipment, fighting for his life because a mechanical failure that should have been addressed decades ago still plagued the Bradley fleet. Jake Sullivan sat across from them, uncharacteristically silent. Earlier, he had spoken with the mechanics who'd examined the damaged Bradley, confirming his suspicions about the cause. Lieutenant General Stanton appeared in the doorway, still in his dress uniform despite the late hour. He nodded to Jim, then addressed Rebecca. Mrs. Reed, I served with your husband in Desert Storm. I want to assure you that the Army is providing Captain Reed with the very best care available. Rebecca's expression cooled. General Stanton, yes, I remember you. Thomas mentioned you in his last letter home. The general shifted uncomfortably. I just wanted to express my personal concern for your son's recovery. Thank you, but what I'd prefer is an explanation of why my son is fighting for his life due to the same mechanical failures that the Army has known about for 30 years. Stanton glanced at Jim, suspicion in his eyes. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Reed. There will be a full investigation. There was a full investigation when Thomas died, she replied. Reports were filed, recommendations were made, and nothing changed. Jim stood. General, could I have a word outside? In the hallway, Jim confronted Stanton directly. Jake confirmed it. Same transmission failure mode that disabled Thomas's Bradley in '91. Same design flaw we identified in our first week of testing. That's not confirmed, Stanton replied stiffly. The investigation is ongoing. Stop hiding behind investigations. You know what happened. You've always known. Jim kept his voice low, but intensity burned in every word. You were in charge of maintenance support during Desert Storm. Your battalion was responsible for field repairs. We followed protocols, Stanton countered. The battlefield situation made rescue operations too risky. And now those same protocols might cost Thomas Reed's son his life. When does it end, General? How many more soldiers have to end up in hospital beds before we admit the system is broken? Stanton's face hardened. Be careful, Colonel. Grief doesn't excuse insubordination. This isn't grief talking. It's 30 years of watching the same mistakes repeated while good soldiers pay the price. Jim stepped closer. You can try to kill the Lazarus Project. You can end my career. But you can't change the reality that our current system fails our troops when they need it most. For a moment, genuine emotion cracked through Stanton's rigid facade. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't carried the weight of those decisions every day since '91? I lost men too, Garrison. Then help us fix it. Instead of throwing impossible metrics at us, give us the support we need to make this work. Stanton turned away. I'll be reviewing your progress next week as scheduled. Meet the benchmarks, Colonel. That's all I can offer right now. As Stanton walked away, Jim returned to the waiting room where Rebecca sat with her eyes closed, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. He hasn't changed, she said without opening her eyes, still hiding behind regulations. Jim sat beside her. Rebecca, there's something you should know. I'm leading a project that could prevent accidents like this in the future. A new system for repairing vehicles in the field. She finally looked at him. After all this time, what changed? Nothing changed. I just finally got someone to listen. Jim hesitated. I promised Thomas at his funeral that I would fix this. I'm still trying to keep that promise. Rebecca reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. He believed in you, Jim. Always said if anyone could change the Army's stubborn ways, it would be you. She smiled sadly. Looks like he was right, just a few decades late. A doctor appeared in the doorway, surgical mask pulled down around his neck. Mrs. Reed, your son is awake. He's asking for you. Rebecca stood quickly. Can Colonel Garrison come too? The doctor nodded. Briefly, he needs rest. They followed him to the ICU, where Michael lay surrounded by monitors and equipment. Despite the tubes and wires, he was alert, his eyes finding them as they entered. Mom, he said, his voice raspy. Colonel Garrison, they told me you were here. Rebecca went to his side, taking his hand carefully among the IV lines. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Like I rolled a 30-ton vehicle, Michael attempted a smile. Doc says I got lucky. Spinal cord's intact. Few months of rehab, I'll be back on duty. You focus on healing first, Rebecca said firmly. Duty can wait. Michael's eyes shifted to Jim. Colonel, my crew? Peters, Rodriguez, Taylor. All recovering, Jim assured him. Less seriously injured, they'll be fine. Michael nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good. He swallowed with difficulty. Sir, it was the transmission. Same thing that happened to my father's vehicle. We were training for deployment, pushing hard. No warning signs, just catastrophic failure during a turn. Jim nodded. We know. Sergeant Sullivan confirmed it with the mechanics. Jake's here? Michael asked, surprised. Right outside, insisted on coming. A faint smile crossed Michael's pale face. Stubborn as ever. His expression grew serious. Sir, our deployment. My company. Don't worry about that now, Jim said. Focus on recovery. Michael shook his head slightly. Need you to understand, where we're going, we need those Bradleys to work. Lives depend on it. My men depend on it. The monitors beeped steadily as silence fell over the room. In that moment, Jim saw not just Michael, but Thomas in that hospital bed, the weight of command responsibility evident in his eyes despite his injuries. I understand, Jim said finally, and I promise you, we're going to fix this. Not just for your unit, but for every soldier who depends on these vehicles. The doctor returned, signaling that their time was up. As Rebecca stayed for a final private moment with her son, Jim stepped into the hallway where Jake waited. How is he? The sergeant asked. Tough, like his father. More concerned about his men than himself. Jake nodded. That's Reed. Always put the mission and his soldiers first. Jim studied the younger man. You really served with him in Afghanistan? Yes, sir. He was a lieutenant then. I was a specialist. He saved my life in Kandahar. Enemy ambush. Could have left me. Completed the mission. Came back instead. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Jim, explaining Jake's uncharacteristic behavior. That's why you volunteered for this project when you heard his name. Jake straightened slightly. I owe him, sir. We all do. As they walked back to the waiting area, Jim made a decision. The Lazarus Project had just become personal for every member of his team. Not just an engineering challenge or a career milestone, but a moral imperative with faces and names attached. Michael Reed would not be the last soldier injured by equipment failures. But if Jim had anything to say about it, he might be one of the last to suffer because repairs couldn't be made in time. May 23, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. 1 week after Michael Reed's accident, the Lazarus team gathered in the main lab, purpose radiating from every member. Ellie had reorganized the workspace for maximum efficiency. Diagnostic equipment prototypes lined one wall, repair tools another. In the center stood a partially disassembled Bradley transmission, the same model that had failed in Michael's vehicle. Let's begin, Jim said, his voice carrying new authority. The team fell silent, all eyes on him. As you know, Captain Reed's accident was caused by the same transmission failure we've been studying, the same failure that's plagued the Bradley fleet for decades. He activated the main display showing detailed schematics. This isn't just a technical problem anymore. It's a moral one. Right now, there are soldiers preparing to deploy with these same vulnerable vehicles. Our job is to make sure they come home. Hank stepped forward. We've completely reverse-engineered the transmission failure mode. Jake and I can now diagnose it in under 15 minutes. And I've developed a field repair procedure, Jake added. Requires minimal tools, can be performed under combat conditions. Layla raised her hand. I've adapted my diagnostic AI to recognize early warning signs before catastrophic failure occurs. If integrated into the Bradley systems, it could prevent accidents entirely. Jim nodded, encouraging each team member. Excellent work, but General Stanton arrives tomorrow for our first major review. He's looking for reasons to terminate the project. We need to show him not just progress, but revolutionary capability. Ellie brought up the project timeline. We've accelerated environmental testing. The diagnostic unit now functions in temperatures from -20 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Dust, rain, and vibration resistance all exceed military specifications. What about the parts management system? Jim asked. Coming together, Layla replied. We're building a predictive algorithm that can anticipate needed components based on deployment conditions and vehicle wear patterns. Jim paced the room, examining each workstation. Good. But tomorrow isn't just about technical demonstrations. It's about proving the concept itself, that forward repair is viable and necessary. Jake crossed his arms. So how do we convince a man who spent his entire career defending the status quo? We show him what's at stake, Jim replied. Not just in technical specifications, but in human terms. The team worked through the night, preparing for Stanton's inspection. Each prototype was tested and retested, each procedure documented and refined. By dawn, exhaustion had set in, but so had determination. Jim watched them from his makeshift office, pride mingling with concern. They were good, these people he'd assembled. Talented, dedicated. But would it be enough to overcome decades of institutional resistance? To change a system that had failed Thomas Reed and now threatened his son? As morning light filtered through the windows, Jim opened his laptop and typed an email to Rebecca Reed, updating her on Michael's condition and the project's progress. At the end, he added a personal note. I made a promise at Thomas's grave, 30 years late, but I intend to keep it. For Michael. For every soldier who depends on these vehicles. Some fights are worth the cost, no matter how long they take. He hit send, then straightened his uniform. In 2 hours, Lieutenant General William Stanton would arrive, looking for reasons to shut them down. Jim intended to give him something else entirely, a vision of what the Army could be if it finally learned from its past mistakes. The future of Operation Lazarus now hung in the balance. But more importantly, so did the lives of countless soldiers like Michael Reed, who deserved better than to be betrayed by the very equipment meant to keep them safe. As his team made final preparations, Jim stood at the window, watching the American flag snap in the morning breeze. Somewhere between the faded memories of Desert Storm and the harsh reality of Michael's hospital bed, this project had become more than a military initiative. It had become a promise to Thomas, to Michael, to every soldier who would follow them into battle. A promise Jim Garrison intended to keep, no matter the cost. May 24, 2023, Rain Metal Research Facility. Lieutenant General William Stanton arrived precisely at 0900 hours, a small entourage of aides trailing behind him. His polished appearance contrasted sharply with the functional workspace of the Lazarus team, who had worked through the night preparing for this inspection. Jim met him at the entrance, exchanging crisp salutes. Colonel Garrison, Stanton said, eyes already scanning the facility. I trust you are prepared for a thorough review. We are, General. The team is eager to demonstrate our progress. Stanton's expression remained neutral. Progress against established metrics is what matters today, not enthusiasm. Jim led the general through the main workshop where diagnostic equipment prototypes lined the walls and team members stood at attention beside their stations. The partially disassembled Bradley transmission dominated the center of the room, components laid out in precise order. As you can see, we've focused initial efforts on the most critical failure points, Jim explained, starting with the transmission system that disabled Captain Reed's vehicle last week. A muscle tightened in Stanton's jaw at the mention of Reed. I reviewed the preliminary accident report. The investigation is ongoing. With respect, sir, we don't need an investigation to identify the cause. Jim nodded to Jake Sullivan, who stepped forward. Sergeant First Class Sullivan, Bradley Systems Specialist, Jake introduced himself. We've identified the precise failure mode in the transmission, a design weakness that becomes critical under specific combat maneuvers, particularly at high speed on uneven terrain. Stanton raised an eyebrow. And your evidence for this conclusion? Jake pointed to the disassembled components. The failure pattern is consistent across 17 documented incidents since 1990, including Major Thomas Reed's in Desert Storm and Captain Michael Reed's last week. Coincidence doesn't establish causality, Sergeant. It's not coincidence, sir, Hank Wilson interjected. The stress patterns on these components show identical fracture characteristics. We've recreated the failure in controlled tests. Stanton turned to Hank. And you are? Master Sergeant Wilson, sir. 28 years experience with armored vehicle maintenance, including 3 combat deployments. Jim directed the general's attention to the main display screen, where Layla Washington stood ready. Lieutenant Washington will demonstrate our diagnostic system. Layla activated her presentation. We've developed an integrated diagnostic platform that can identify this transmission failure within minutes, along with 37 other critical Bradley systems. The unit is ruggedized for field conditions and interfaces with existing Bradley electronics. The screen displayed test results, component specifications, and environmental performance data. Stanton studied them carefully, his expression revealing nothing. "Impressive on paper, Lieutenant," he said finally, "but this facility is a far cry from combat conditions. Which is why we've constructed this," Ellie Martinez said, leading them toward an environmental test chamber at the rear of the facility. Complete simulation of desert conditions, including temperature extremes, dust storms, and vibration consistent with combat movement. Inside the chamber, a complete diagnostic unit was undergoing testing, sand swirling around it as temperature readings showed 115 degrees Fahrenheit. "The unit has maintained full functionality for 72 hours under these conditions," Ellie explained. "No performance degradation, no false readings." Stanton watched the demonstration without comment, then consulted the benchmark requirements he'd established. "Your diagnostic capabilities appear to be proceeding adequately. However, the repair component of this project remains unproven. Identifying failures quickly is only half the challenge." "We're well aware, General," Jim replied, "which is why we've developed this." He led Stanton to the vehicle bay where a complete Bradley fighting vehicle waited. Beside it stood a large container mounted on a transportable platform. "The Mobile Armored Repair Station, or MARS," Jim said, "contains all tools, diagnostic equipment, and critical replacement components needed to repair 80% of battlefield damage. Deployable by C-130, operationally ready within 2 hours of arrival." "And the personnel requirements?" Stanton asked. "4 trained technicians per unit," Jim answered. "We've developed accelerated training protocols to certify existing maintenance personnel." For the next 2 hours, the team demonstrated each aspect of the system, from initial damage assessment through repair procedures to return to service validation. Stanton observed carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his extensive knowledge of logistics challenges. As the demonstration concluded, Jim invited the general to his office for a private assessment. The room was sparse, functional, with maps of deployment regions covering one wall. On Jim's desk sat a single-frame photograph showing a young Lieutenant Garrison with Thomas Reed beside their tanks in Saudi Arabia, 1990. "Impressive work for 1 month of development," Stanton acknowledged as he took a seat. "Your team is clearly talented." "Thank you, General. We believe the concept is proving itself." Stanton placed his benchmark assessment on the desk. "Technically, perhaps, but I have serious reservations about field implementation. The resource allocation alone would require significant restructuring of our logistics framework." "A restructuring that's 30 years overdue," Jim countered. "That's your opinion, Colonel, colored by personal experience." Stanton glanced at the photograph. "Your history with the Reed family is well known. It raises questions about your objectivity." Jim leaned forward. "My history gives me clarity, not bias. I've seen firsthand the cost of our current system's failures. Every system has failures. The question is one of resource allocation and strategic priority." Stanton tapped the assessment document. "Your diagnostic capabilities have met Phase 1 benchmarks. For that reason alone, I'm not recommending termination at this time." But the repair component requires far more validation. I want to see a full field test, real-world conditions, not simulated environments." Stanton stood. "Arrange a demonstration at the National Training Center. Repair actual battle-damaged vehicles under simulated combat conditions. That would require significant resources we haven't been allocated yet. Consider it your next benchmark, Colonel." Stanton moved to the door. 1 month from today, show me this system working at NTC, and I'll reconsider my position on full implementation." After the general departed, Jim gathered his team in the conference room. Exhaustion showed on every face after the long night of preparation, but so did determination. "The general has set our next challenge," Jim informed them. "Full field demonstration at NTC in 1 month." Jake whistled softly. "That's a tight timeline, sir." "Deliberately so," Jim agreed. "Stanton's giving us enough rope to hang ourselves. But we're going to prove him wrong." Ellie shook her head. "The environmental testing isn't complete. The parts inventory system is still in development, and we haven't even started training protocols for the repair teams." "Then we accelerate everything," Jim said firmly. "Hank, Jake, I want you focused on finalizing repair procedures for the 20 most common battlefield failures. Documented, streamlined, teachable to average maintenance personnel." "On it, Colonel," Hank acknowledged. "Ellie, Layla, complete the environmental validation and integration testing. The system needs to be bulletproof by NTC. Jim turned to the logistics board. We'll need at least 3 fully functional Mars units for the demonstration, plus transportation, support equipment, and trained personnel. The budget won't cover all that, Ellie noted. We're already stretching our allocation thin. Jim nodded grimly. I'll handle the budget issues. For now, focus on making the technology work. We have one shot at this. As the team dispersed to their stations, renewed purpose in their movements, Jim remained in the conference room, studying the deployment maps. The stakes had just been raised significantly. Stanton had set them up for a high-visibility test that could either validate the entire concept or kill it permanently. And somewhere in a hospital bed at Walter Reed, Michael Reed was fighting his own battle, unaware that his accident had become the catalyst for a potential revolution in military maintenance doctrine. June 10, 23. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Michael Reed gripped the parallel bars, sweat beading on his forehead as he forced his legs to take another step. 4 weeks after the accident that nearly claimed his mobility, he was defying medical predictions with his recovery. The physical therapist walked backward in front of him, monitoring his progress. Good, Captain. 2 more steps, and you've beaten yesterday's record. Michael grimaced, pushing through the pain. His legs trembled with the effort, muscles relearning what had once been automatic. With a final surge of determination, he completed the distance. Excellent work, the therapist said, helping him into the wheelchair. You're progressing faster than anyone expected. Not fast enough, Michael replied, frustration evident in his voice. My unit deploys in 5 months. Jim Garrison watched from the doorway, having arrived moments earlier. The scene brought a mixture of pride and concern. Michael's determination mirrored his father's, but Jim worried about the young captain pushing too hard. Colonel Garrison, Michael called out, noticing him. Come to check on your investment? Jim entered the therapy room. Just visiting a friend. How's the recovery going? The therapist excused herself, giving them privacy. Doctors are calling it remarkable, Michael said, toweling the sweat from his face. Spinal cord bruised but not severed. Internal injuries healing well. They're predicting a full recovery eventually. That's fantastic news, but not soon enough. Michael's expression darkened. Charlie Company deploys without me in November. New commander being assigned next month. Jim pulled up a chair. Your career isn't over, Michael. There will be other commands. It's not about my career. It's about my men. Michael looked directly at Jim. They're heading into a high-risk environment with the same vulnerable equipment that put me in this chair. That killed my father. The parallels hung heavy in the air between them. That's why I'm here, actually, Jim said, to update you on Project Lazarus. We're making significant progress. Field tests at NTC in 2 weeks. Hope flickered in Michael's eyes. Real-world validation? As close as we can get without an actual combat zone. If successful, the system could be ready for limited deployment by early 2024. Too late for Charlie Company. Jim nodded. For this rotation, yes, but hopefully in time for many others. Michael wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the hospital grounds where other wounded warriors worked through their own recovery journeys. Mom says you made a promise at Dad's funeral, that you've been trying to fix this problem for 30 years. He turned back to Jim. Why did it take so long? The question cut deep, forcing Jim to confront the decades of bureaucratic resistance, budget constraints, and institutional inertia that had delayed solutions to known problems. The military changes slowly, Michael. Too slowly, but it does change. Jim paused. Your accident has actually accelerated things, brought renewed attention to the issue. So my career might be sacrificed for the greater good? Is that what you're saying? I'm saying your sacrifice might save others from the same fate, or worse. Michael absorbed this, his expression gradually shifting from bitterness to resolve. Tell me about the system you're building. Everything. I want to know exactly how it's going to help my men when they deploy. For the next hour, Jim detailed the Mars concept, the diagnostic innovations, the repair procedures being developed. Michael listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed his deep understanding of Bradley systems. You know, Michael said when Jim finished, I studied your career at West Point. Your tank actions in Desert Storm and Iraq are legendary, but this might be your most important contribution. If it works, Jim cautioned, we still have significant hurdles to clear. General Stanton being the biggest, I imagine. Jim raised an eyebrow. You know about that? Michael gave a humorless laugh. Everyone in armor knows about Stanton, old school to the bone, believes in central depots and traditional logistics chains. He hesitated. He was the one who denied the repair request for Dad's Bradley, wasn't he? How did you know that? Mom has all of Dad's letters. In his last one, he mentioned having transmission issues and requesting field maintenance support. Said the request was denied by some rear echelon colonel who never left the command post. Jim nodded slowly. Stanton was that colonel. Now he's a lieutenant general with the power to kill our project. Unless your NTC demonstration blows him away. That's the plan. Michael reached for the parallel bars, pulling himself upright again despite the therapist's instructions to rest. Then make it work, Colonel, for all of us who've paid the price for the system's failures. He stood unassisted for a moment, sheer will overcoming physical limitation. I'll be watching, and if you need any insights from someone who's commanded these vehicles in the field, call me. As Jim prepared to leave, Michael added one more thing. My father believed in you, Colonel. Said you were the one officer who always put soldiers before career advancement. Don't prove him wrong. The weight of that legacy followed Jim from the hospital, through the Pentagon's endless corridors where he spent the afternoon fighting for additional resources, and back to the Rheinmetall facility where his team worked around the clock to prepare for the NTC demonstration. June 15, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. The prototype Mars unit gleamed under the facility lights, painted in desert tan with the project name stenciled on its side. Inside, every inch of space had been optimized for battlefield repair efficiency. Diagnostic equipment, specialized tools, and critical replacement components were arranged in modular compartments for rapid access. Ellie Martinez made final adjustments to the environmental control system, while Jake Sullivan and Hank Wilson conducted inventory checks. Layla Washington monitored the integrated computer systems from her workstation. Primary systems green across the board, she announced. Diagnostic interface fully operational. Repair guidance programs loaded and validated. Jim entered the workspace, returning from his meetings at the Pentagon. The team turned expectantly, hoping for good news about their resource requests. Transportation to NTC is confirmed, he began. 3 C-130s allocated for equipment movement. Will have full access to the maintenance range for 72 hours with simulated combat conditions. And the test vehicles? Hank asked. 8 Bradleys with various damage profiles, some with actual battle damage from Iraq and Afghanistan transported back for evaluation. Others will be damaged during controlled exercises. Jake whistled. That's a serious test, sir. Stanton wants to prove we can't do it. Jim replied, we're going to prove him wrong. He unfolded a map of the National Training Center on the main table. The sprawling facility in the Mojave Desert provided the U.S. military's most realistic training environment, with vast ranges designed to simulate combat conditions from around the world. We'll deploy here, Jim indicated a forward position. Vehicles will be spread across this 10-mile range. Our mission, assess, repair, and return to service as many as possible within 48 hours. Under what conditions? Ellie asked. Full desert environment, daytime temperatures exceeding 110 degrees. Limited water supply. Simulated enemy activity requiring periodic defensive posture. Layla frowned at her tablet. The diagnostic systems haven't been fully tested under those exact parameters. Then we test them now, Jim said firmly. 2 weeks to prepare. I want daily progress reports. Any issue, no matter how small, gets addressed immediately. The team nodded, understanding the stakes. What about personnel? Hank asked. We need trained operators for the demonstration. I've arranged for a squad from the 1st Armored Division Maintenance Battalion. They arrive Monday for crash training. Jim looked at each team member in turn. You'll have 6 days to turn them into Mars operators. 6 days? Jake protested. Sir, these procedures took us weeks to develop and perfect, which is why you'll create simplified protocols focused on the most common battlefield damage. Teach them what they need to know for the demonstration, nothing more. As the team dispersed to continue preparations, Jim called Ellie to his office. How are we really doing? He asked once they were alone. Honest assessment. Ellie sighed, removing her glasses to rub tired eyes. The technology works, Jim. The diagnostic system is revolutionary. The repair procedures are sound, but the integration is still problematic. Explain. We're asking maintenance personnel with traditional training to adopt completely new protocols under extreme conditions. That's a human factor we can't fully control or predict. Jim nodded, understanding her concern. Can we simplify further? Focus on absolute essentials for the demonstration? We're already cutting corners I'm not comfortable with, Ellie admitted. The parts inventory system is functioning but not optimized. The environmental hardening meets minimum specs but hasn't been stress tested to failure. We don't have time for perfection, Ellie. We need functional, provable capability that demonstrates the concept. I know, she hesitated. There's something else. The transmission repair procedure for the Bradley requires specialized tools we've developed. They work perfectly, but they're not standard issue. If Stanton argues that the demonstration succeeds only because of non-deployable equipment, he'll use it to kill the project. Jim finished her thought. Adapt the procedure to use only standard issue tools, even if it's less efficient. That will add significant time to each repair. Better a slower repair using existing tools than a theoretical fast repair using equipment the Army won't approve. Jim stood, moving to the map on his wall. Stanton knows logistics and supply chains. He'll look for dependencies we can't support in a combat environment. Ellie nodded. I'll work with Jake and Hank to revise the procedures. Good. And Ellie, Jim added as she turned to leave. When was the last time you slept a full night? She smiled wearily. Sometime last week, I think. We need you sharp for NTC. Take tonight off. That's an order. After she left, Jim called Rebecca Reed, providing an update on the project's progress. As they spoke, he could hear physical therapy exercises in the background. Michael's pushing himself too hard, Rebecca said. The doctors are concerned, but he won't listen. He's determined to rejoin his unit before deployment, Jim noted. A deployment that will happen with or without him, with the same equipment that nearly killed him. Frustration and fear mingled in her voice. Jim, he told me about your demonstration at NTC. He wants to attend. That's not possible. He's nowhere near ready for that kind of travel. Try telling him that. He's already requested convalescent leave to coincide with your test dates. Jim processed this information with growing concern. Rebecca, the Mojave Desert in June is brutal even for healthy personnel, for someone in Michael's condition. I know that. You know that. But Michael sees this as his duty, to his men, to his father's memory. She paused. He has Thomas's stubbornness. After the call, Jim sat alone in his office, the weight of responsibility pressing down. The Lazarus Project had evolved from a technical challenge into something far more personal and consequential. It wasn't just about meeting benchmarks or proving concepts anymore. It was about fulfilling a decades-old promise and potentially saving the lives of soldiers like Michael Reed. And somewhere in the Pentagon, General Stanton was likely planning how to ensure the demonstration failed. June 20th, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. The maintenance squad from the 1st Armored Division arrived at 0700, 12 soldiers with various levels of experience in Bradley repairs. They stood at attention in the main workshop as Jim introduced the project and its purpose. You've been selected for specialized training in forward battlefield repair techniques, he explained. What you learn here will be demonstrated at the National Training Center next week, potentially changing how the Army handles combat vehicle maintenance for decades to come. The soldiers listened attentively as Jim outlined the MARS concept, the innovative diagnostic systems, and the streamlined repair procedures they would learn. Questions before we begin? A staff sergeant stepped forward. Sir, we've all worked on Bradleys before. What makes this system different from standard field maintenance? Good question, Sergeant. The difference is in speed, proximity, and capability, Jim replied. Current doctrine pulls damaged vehicles back to secure areas, often hundreds of miles from the front. Repairs take weeks or months. The MARS system brings advanced diagnostic and repair capabilities forward, near the fight. Turnaround time is measured in hours or days, not weeks. Another soldier raised his hand. Sir, we've been told this training is classified. Why the secrecy for a maintenance system? Jim exchanged glances with Hank Wilson, who answered. Because if it works, it changes battlefield dynamics significantly. Sustaining combat power becomes a force multiplier that potential adversaries would want to counter. The soldiers nodded, understanding the strategic implications. One more thing, Jim added. This isn't just about technology or tactics. It's about bringing our people home. He paused, letting his words sink in. Every vehicle we can repair quickly is a crew that maintains its protection and fighting capability. Every day saved in repair time is a day that vehicle is back in the fight, supporting its unit. With introductions complete, the soldiers were divided into 4 teams, each assigned to different aspects of the MARS system. Jake Sullivan took one group to learn diagnostic procedures, while Hank Wilson focused another on rapid transmission repairs. Ellie Martinez trained a 3rd team on the environmental systems and containerized workshop operations. Layla Washington handled the 4th group, teaching the integrated computer systems and inventory management. Jim moved between the teams, observing the training and addressing questions. By mid-afternoon, it became clear that some soldiers grasped the new concepts quickly, while others struggled with the departure from traditional procedures. Having trouble, specialist? Jim asked a young soldier who was repeatedly failing to complete a diagnostic sequence. Yes, sir, the specialist admitted. The procedure contradicts everything I was taught about electronic safety on the Bradley. Jim nodded. That's because the Mars protocols prioritize speed in a combat environment. The trade-offs are calculated based on operational necessity. But sir, if I did this in normal maintenance, I'd be written up for endangering the equipment. You're not wrong, specialist. We're asking you to unlearn established procedures and embrace new ones. It's not easy. Jim demonstrated the correct sequence. But sometimes survival requires adaptation, even when it feels counterintuitive. By evening, the first day of training had revealed both promise and problems. The team gathered in the conference room to assess progress while the soldiers returned to their quarters. We're asking too much too fast, Ellie concluded. These men are trained in conventional maintenance. The Mars concepts require a fundamental shift in thinking. We don't have time for gradual adjustment, Jim reminded her. NTC is 10 days away. Then we need to simplify further, Hank suggested. Focus on 4 key repair procedures instead of 12. Master those completely rather than achieve partial competency across the board. Which 4, Jake asked. Transmission, power distribution, weapon systems, and mobility components, Hank replied without hesitation. Those account for 70% of combat disabling failures. Layla nodded in agreement. I can adapt the diagnostic guidance systems to prioritize those systems. Provide more detailed instruction for operators. Do it, Jim decided. Revise the training schedule starting tomorrow. Better to demonstrate complete capability in limited areas than partial capability across all systems. As the meeting concluded, Jim received a call from Walter Reed. Michael Reed had been granted convalescent leave to observe the NTC demonstration, against medical advice but with support from his chain of command. The decision had already been made. Jim was being informed as a courtesy. He's still using a wheelchair most of the time, the medical officer explained. Short distances with crutches. He'll require assistance and medical monitoring throughout. The NTC in summer is brutal, Jim protested. Temperatures often exceed 120 degrees. Dust storms, minimal facilities. We've made those points clearly, Colonel. Captain Reed understands the risks and has accepted them. His attending physician has provided guidelines for his care during the demonstration. After the call, Jim sat alone in the facility's small break room, a cold cup of coffee forgotten before him. Michael's determination to witness the demonstration added yet another layer of pressure to an already precarious situation. If the system failed with him watching, the psychological impact would be devastating, not just for Michael, but for the entire team. Yet Jim understood the young captain's need to be there, to see firsthand the potential solution to the problem that had claimed his father and nearly taken his own mobility. Sometimes witnessing the attempt was as important as the outcome itself. With renewed resolve, Jim returned to the workshop where Hank and Jake were modifying the training plan for the next day. The 3 men worked late into the night, distilling complex procedures into teachable sequences, identifying the essential knowledge the maintenance squad would need to succeed at NTC. June 25, 2023, Rain Metal Research Facility. 5 days into the accelerated training program, the maintenance squad was showing remarkable progress. In the workshop, they conducted a full simulation, repairing a deliberately damaged Bradley transmission in just under 4 hours, a task that would have taken weeks under conventional procedures. Diagnostic sequence complete, the team leader announced. Primary failure identified in transfer case assembly, secondary damage to hydraulic systems. The soldiers moved with growing confidence, each performing their assigned roles in the repair sequence. What had seemed alien and counterintuitive days earlier was becoming fluid, practiced. Parts requisition submitted through inventory system, another soldier reported. Estimated delivery time to repair station, 20 minutes. Jim watched from the observation platform alongside Ellie and Layla. The integration issues that had concerned them were gradually resolving as the soldiers adapted to the new procedures and systems. They're getting it, Layla said, genuine surprise in her voice. I didn't think they'd master the diagnostic interface this quickly. Never underestimate what motivated soldiers can learn when they understand the stakes, Jim replied. These men know what this could mean for their fellow troops. Ellie checked her tablet, reviewing performance metrics. Repair times are still running 30% above our target, Will that be good enough for the demonstration? It will have to be, Jim said. We're out of time for major improvements. What matters now is proving the concept works under field conditions. The final days before deployment to NTC were a blur of equipment checks, procedure refinements, and contingency planning. 3 Mars units were prepared for transport, along with support equipment, spare parts, and personal gear for the team and maintenance squad. Everything needed to function in one of the harshest environments on American soil, under the scrutinizing gaze of General Stanton and his evaluation team. On the eve of deployment, Jim gathered everyone in the main workshop for final instructions. Tomorrow we move to the National Training Center for the most important demonstration of this project, he began. For 3 days, we will operate in desert conditions, repairing combat-damaged vehicles under simulated battlefield stress. The soldiers and technical team listened attentively, the gravity of the moment evident on every face. General Stanton and his evaluation team will be watching every move, measuring every result against established metrics. They're expecting us to fail. Jim paused. We're going to prove them wrong. He outlined the demonstration parameters. 8 damaged Bradleys scattered across 10 miles of desert terrain. The Mars units would deploy, locate, assess, and repair as many vehicles as possible within 48 hours. Success would be measured not just in numbers of vehicles returned to service, but in the speed, quality, and sustainability of the repairs. One more thing, Jim added. Captain Michael Reed will be observing the demonstration. Many of you know his story. The accident that nearly cost him his mobility was caused by the same transmission failure we've been working to address. His father, Major Thomas Reed, died in 1991 when his Bradley couldn't be repaired in a combat zone. A murmur went through the soldiers as they processed this information. The human cost behind the technical challenge suddenly very real. Captain Reed's presence reminds us what's truly at stake. This isn't about proving a concept or advancing careers. It's about saving lives, preserving combat power, making sure that what happened to the Reed family doesn't happen to others. Jim looked at each person in turn, from the newest specialist to his core technical team. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we make history. June 28, 23, National Training Center, Fort Irwin, California. The Mojave Desert stretched in all directions, a vast expanse of sand, rock, and scrub brush baking under the merciless sun. By 900, temperatures had already climbed past 100 degrees as the 3 C-130 transport aircraft touched down at the NTC airfield. Within minutes, the Mars units and support equipment were being offloaded, the maintenance squad moving with practiced efficiency despite the heat. Jim supervised the deployment from a command post established at the edge of the demonstration area. Beside him, Michael Reed sat in his wheelchair, sweat already soaking his t-shirt despite the shade provided by a tactical shelter. The young captain had arrived the previous evening, accompanied by a medical technician who monitored his condition continuously. Impressive setup, Michael observed as the Mars units were positioned for deployment. More compact than I imagined. Jim handed him a bottle of water. Everything designed for C-130 transport and rapid assembly, from wheels down to operational readiness in under 2 hours. Michael drank deeply, then gestured toward a group of officers watching from a distance. I see General Stanton has brought an entourage. Evaluation team, Jim confirmed, plus representatives from Army Materiel Command, Pentagon Acquisition, and congressional staffers from the Armed Services Committee. High visibility demonstration. Deliberately so. Stanton wants maximum exposure if we fail. Michael's expression hardened. And if you succeed, then he has a lot of explaining to do about why this capability has been resisted for 30 years. The demonstration began at precisely 1,000 hours. The 8 damaged Bradleys had been positioned overnight, their locations marked on tactical maps but not revealed to the Mars teams until the exercise commenced. Each vehicle suffered different damage, from transmission failures to weapons system malfunctions to mobility issues. The first Mars unit deployed immediately, heading toward the nearest damaged Bradley 5 miles west of the command post. The second unit followed 30 minutes later, targeting a cluster of 3 vehicles in the northern sector. The third unit remained in reserve, ready to support either team or address additional vehicles as the others were completed. Jim monitored their progress through vehicle tracking systems and radio reports, providing updates to Michael and the observing officers. By noon, the first unit had reached its target, a Bradley with significant powertrain damage that would normally require depot-level maintenance. Mars 1 beginning diagnostic sequence, the team leader reported. Deployment complete, Systems Online. Through video feeds, Jim watched as the soldiers executed their training. The Mars container expanded into a functional workshop, environmental systems combating the desert heat. Diagnostic equipment was connected to the Bradley, data streaming into analysis computers. Initial assessment complete, came the report 20 minutes later. Primary failure in transmission main shaft, secondary damage to control electronics, estimated repair time using Mars protocols, 6 hours. Stanton stepped into the command post, his uniform still crisp despite the heat. 6 hours, Colonel Garrison, that's your revolutionary improvement? A conventional depot would take days, not hours. A conventional depot hundreds of miles from the battlefield, Jim countered. This repair is happening 5 miles from where the vehicle was disabled, with minimal transport requirements. The crew could remain with their unit. The repaired vehicle returned to the fight immediately. Stanton made a non-committal sound, moving to study the tracking display. We'll see if the repair actually succeeds under these conditions. By mid-afternoon, all 8 Bradleys had been located and assessed. The damage ranged from relatively minor weapons malfunctions to catastrophic mobility failures. The Mars teams prioritized their efforts based on repair complexity and tactical importance, following the protocols developed during training. The desert heat intensified, pushing past 115 degrees. Dust devils swirled across the demonstration area as wind picked up, adding another layer of challenge. Yet the Mars units continued functioning, their environmental systems maintaining workable conditions for the repair teams. Michael watched intently, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed his deep understanding of Bradley systems. Despite the medical technician's concerns about heat exposure, he refused to leave the command post, determined to witness every aspect of the demonstration. The transmission repair procedure they're using, he noted during a video feed from Mars One, that's different from standard protocol. Jim nodded. Developed by Jake Sullivan based on battlefield experience in Afghanistan, bypasses non-critical systems to focus on mobility restoration. Smart. Gets the vehicle moving again even if secondary systems remain compromised. Michael adjusted his position in the wheelchair, grimacing slightly from pain. That's the kind of thinking that would have saved my father's vehicle. The first repaired Bradley returned to operational status at 1730 hours, ahead of the estimated timeline. The Mars team had completed a power distribution repair that would have required depot maintenance under conventional protocols. The vehicle started up, weapons and mobility systems functioning within operational parameters. Stanton observed the test drive impassively, making notes on his evaluation tablet. One successful repair doesn't validate the concept, Colonel. It's a start, General, Jim replied evenly. 7 more to go. As darkness fell over the desert, temperatures dropped rapidly, presenting a new set of challenges. The Mars units switched to night operations mode, powerful lights illuminating their work areas, while thermal management systems adjusted to the changing conditions. 2 more Bradleys were repaired by midnight, both with weapons system failures that would have rendered them combat ineffective. Jim maintained the command post throughout the night, catching brief moments of rest, but never fully relinquishing oversight. Michael eventually succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping fitfully in a cot set up beside his wheelchair while the medical technician monitored his vital signs. Dawn brought renewed heat in the halfway point of the demonstration. 3 vehicles repaired, 5 remaining. The most challenging cases had been deliberately left for last, including a Bradley with damage patterns identical to those that disabled Michael's vehicle. Mars 3 deploying to target Echo, Jim ordered as the sun crested the eastern mountains. Priority repair on transmission assembly. This would be the most critical test yet. The damaged Bradley represented exactly the type of failure the Lazarus Project had been created to address. The same failure that had cost Thomas Reed his life and nearly claimed his son's mobility. Stanton appeared at the command post as Mars 3 began its deployment, looking surprisingly fresh despite the early hour. Sleep well, General? Jim asked. Well enough. 3 vehicles repaired in 14 hours is noteworthy, Colonel. But the real test comes now. Stanton gestured toward the tracking display showing Mars 3's progress. That Bradley has catastrophic transmission damage. In my experience, that's a depot-level repair, minimum 3 weeks. We'll see, Jim replied, refusing to be drawn into predictions. Michael awoke as Mars 3 reached its target, immediately focusing on the video feed showing the damaged Bradley. His expression tightened as he recognized the distinctive pattern of damage. Same failure mode, he said quietly. Exactly the same as mine. The Mars team began their assessment, the diagnostic systems quickly identifying the critical damage points. The team leader reported back to the command post with a preliminary estimate. Transmission completely failed, sir. Drive shaft fractured. Control systems compromised. Estimated repair time using Mars protocols, 10 hours. Stanton raised an eyebrow. 10 hours for a complete transmission replacement in field conditions? Impossible. Not replacement, General, Jim corrected. Modular repair. The Mars approach replaces only the damaged components, not entire systems. The next 10 hours became the crucible in which the Lazarus project would either prove its worth or confirm Stanton's doubts. Jim rotated between the command post and the Mars 3 location, observing the repair process firsthand, while Michael remained at the command post, following progress through video feeds and status reports. By late afternoon, signs of fatigue showed on the repair team as they worked through the complex procedure. The desert heat had returned in full force, testing the environmental systems of the Mars unit and the endurance of the soldiers. Yet they continued methodically, following the protocols developed over weeks of intensive preparation. Final assembly stage. The team leader reported at 16:45 hours. Transmission reconstruction 80% complete. Control systems repaired and tested. Estimated completion time, 90 minutes. Jim returned to the command post to find Michael engaged in intense conversation with General Stanton. The tension between them was palpable, decades of institutional history and personal loss colliding in the desert heat. With respect, General, the evidence is right in front of you, Michael was saying, gesturing toward the status displays. The Mars system has already repaired 3 Bradleys that would have been shipped stateside under current protocols. At what cost, Captain? Stanton countered. The resource allocation, the specialized equipment, the training requirements. The current system may be slower, but it's proven and established. Proven? Michael's voice rose slightly. It proved fatal for my father. It nearly cost me my ability to walk. How many more soldiers have to pay that price before we admit the system needs changing? Jim intervened before the exchange could escalate further. Michael, medical check. Now. He nodded to the technician, who moved to take Michael's vital signs. Stanton stepped outside, staring across the desert expanse toward the distant Mars units. Jim followed after ensuring Michael complied with the medical examination. He's passionate, Stanton observed, like his father. Thomas Reed was one of the finest officers I ever served with, Jim said, and Michael is cut from the same cloth. I remember Thomas. Stanton's voice carried an unexpected weight. I remember the day his Bradley was disabled. The request for forward maintenance support. The request you denied. Stanton turned to face Jim, decades of military discipline barely containing deeper emotions. I denied it based on established protocols and risk assessment. Enemy activity in the sector made a repair mission excessively dangerous. So instead, Reed and his crew sat exposed for hours until they could be extracted. By then it was too late. Jim held the general's gaze. That's the choice our current system forces commanders to make, General. Risk a repair team or abandon a vehicle and possibly its crew. And you believe your Mars system changes that equation? I know it does. Faster diagnosis, rapid repair, minimal transport requirements. Vehicles return to service in hours or days, not weeks or months. Combat power preserved, soldiers protected. Stanton was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without further comment, he returned to the command post. At 18:30 hours, the call came from Mars 3. Transmission repair complete, sir. Running final diagnostics now. The command post fell silent as everyone watched the video feed. The repaired Bradley's engine turned over, caught, then roared to life. Systems came online one by one, green indicators appearing on the status display. All systems nominal, reported the team leader. Bradley fully operational, repair complete. Michael Reed's face showed a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, relief, grief for what might have been. He reached for Jim's hand, gripping it tightly. They did it, he said, voice barely audible. They actually did it. Yes, Jim replied simply, they did. He looked toward General Stanton, expecting continued skepticism or new objections. Instead, the general was studying the repair data with intense concentration, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. The demonstration continued through the night and into the following day. By the 48-hour mark, 7 of the 8 Bradleys had been returned to operational status. The 8th required parts not included in the Mars inventory, an intentional limitation to test the system's response to repair requirements beyond its capability. As the exercise concluded, Jim gathered the maintenance squad and technical team for a debriefing. Exhaustion showed on every face, along with pride in what they had accomplished. You've done something remarkable here, he told them, proven that a concept 30 years in development can actually work in real-world conditions. Whatever the evaluation concludes, know that your efforts have moved us one step closer to a system that will save soldiers' lives and preserve combat capability. The soldiers responded with tired but genuine enthusiasm, their belief in the project's value reinforced by 2 days of successful operations under brutal conditions. General Stanton approached as the team dispersed, his evaluation tablet in hand. Impressive results, Colonel Garrison. 6 complete repairs, 1 partial repair requiring additional components, 1 beyond Mars capability, but correctly triaged, all within the 48-hour window. Thank you, General. Jim waited for the inevitable criticism, the identification of flaws or limitations that would justify continued resistance. Instead, Stanton handed him the tablet. My preliminary evaluation. You'll find my recommendation on the final page. Jim scrolled through the detailed assessment, page after page of technical analysis, resource requirements, and implementation challenges. Then he reached the conclusion and recommendation. Based on observed performance under field conditions, I recommend limited deployment of the Mobile Armored Repair System, or MARS, to select combat units for extended evaluation, with priority given to units deploying to potential conflict zones. Further, I recommend additional funding for continued development and refinement of the system, with the goal of full implementation across armored units by 2025. Jim looked up in surprise. This is unexpected, General. Is it? Stanton gazed across the desert range where the Mars units were being prepared for transport. You've spent 30 years pushing this concept, Colonel. Did you really expect me to ignore conclusive evidence when it was finally presented? Given your consistent opposition, yes. My opposition wasn't to the concept, but to premature implementation without adequate testing. Stanton's expression softened slightly. I've carried the weight of Thomas Reed's death for 30 years, Garrison. I made a decision based on protocols that may have contributed to that outcome. If this system can prevent similar tragedies, only a fool would stand in its way out of stubborn adherence to tradition. Before Jim could respond, Michael Reed approached, moving slowly on crutches but rejecting assistance from the medical technician. General Stanton, he said, coming to attention as best his condition allowed. Captain Reed reporting for conclusion of observation duty. Stanton returned his salute. At ease, Captain. Your presence here has been noted in my evaluation. Your insights on Bradley vulnerabilities proved valuable. Thank you, sir. May I ask the outcome of your assessment? Stanton hesitated, then made a decision. Colonel Garrison can brief you on the details. But in short, I'm recommending deployment of the Mars system to select units, including the 66th Armor Regiment, before their November rotation. Michael's composure nearly broke, emotion washing across his face. My unit, sir? Your unit, Captain, whether you're sufficiently recovered to deploy with them, remains a medical decision, but they'll have this capability if my recommendation is accepted. Thank you, General. Stanton nodded once, then turned back to Jim. The full evaluation will be submitted to the Pentagon tomorrow. I expect pushback from traditional logistics advocates. Be prepared to defend the concept before the Armed Services Committee next month. As Stanton departed to confer with his evaluation team, Jim and Michael stood together in the desert heat, both processing the unexpected turn of events. He's really supporting it, Michael said, disbelief evident in his voice. After all these years. People can surprise you, Jim replied, even generals set in their ways. Or maybe seeing is believing. This demonstration would convince anyone with an open mind. Jim smiled faintly. Let's not celebrate yet. Pentagon approval, congressional funding, full implementation. There are still many hurdles ahead. But it's a start, Michael insisted. A real start after 30 years. Jim looked across the demonstration area where the Mars unit stood ready for transport. Physical proof of a concept born from tragedy and sustained through decades of bureaucratic resistance. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that his promise to Thomas Reed might actually be fulfilled. Yes, he agreed finally, it's a start. As the desert sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Jim Garrison felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Not completely gone, not yet, but lighter than it had been in 30 years. The Lazarus Project had taken its first step from concept to reality, and somewhere he hoped Thomas Reed was watching. July 12, 2023, the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. The conference room fell silent as Jim Garrison concluded his presentation. Around the oak table sat the decision makers who would determine the future of Project Lazarus: the Army Chief of Staff, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, representatives from the Armed Services Committees, and the brass from Army Materiel Command. General Stanton occupied a seat near the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "In summary," Jim said, standing beside the final slide showing the results from the National Training Center demonstration, the Mobile Armored Repair System achieved an 87% successful repair rate under simulated combat conditions. Vehicles that would traditionally require months of depot maintenance were returned to operational status within hours or days in the field. Wow. The Chief of Staff leaned forward. "Impressive results, Colonel Garrison. General Stanton's evaluation confirms your findings. His recommendation for limited deployment to select units is on the table." Jim glanced at Stanton, still surprised by the general's support. "Thank you, sir." "However," the Undersecretary interjected, "there remain significant questions about resource allocation, training requirements, and integration with existing logistics frameworks. The $31 million you've spent so far is just the beginning. Full implementation across armored units would require billions." "With respect, Madam Secretary," Jim replied, "those billions represent an investment in soldier survival and battlefield capability. Every vehicle returned to service quickly is a crew that maintains its protection. Every crew protected potentially means lives saved." A congressional staffer raised his hand. "Colonel, your passion for this project is evident and admirable, but passion doesn't answer practical questions. What happens when a Mars unit encounters damage beyond its capability? When specialized parts aren't available in the field?" "Then we fall back to traditional methods," Jim acknowledged. "The Mars concept isn't meant to replace depot maintenance entirely. It's designed to handle the most common battlefield damage, the 80% of cases that can be resolved with the right tools, expertise, and parts in the forward area." The discussion continued for another hour, probing every aspect of the project from technical specifications to deployment logistics. Jim answered each question methodically, drawing on data from the NTC demonstration and the expertise developed over months of intensive work. Finally, the Chief of Staff closed his folder. "Colonel Garrison, you've made a compelling case. I'm inclined to support General Stanton's recommendation for limited deployment to the 66th Armor Regiment before their November rotation, with further evaluation before wider implementation." Jim nodded, relief washing through him. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," the general cautioned. "This decision will face significant resistance from traditional logistics advocates. The budget implications alone will trigger bureaucratic battles." He glanced at the congressional representatives. "And we'll need funding authorization from your committees." One of the representatives, a silver-haired former Marine, spoke for the first time. "The video footage from your NTC demonstration was particularly effective, Colonel Garrison. Seeing those Bradleys return to operational status in the field makes a strong case." He turned to his colleagues. "I believe we can find the funding for this limited deployment and continued development." As the meeting concluded, Jim gathered his presentation materials, aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. After 30 years of advocacy, the Mars concept had finally received preliminary approval from the highest levels of military leadership. A limited deployment wasn't full implementation, but it was a decisive first step. General Stanton approached as the others filed out. "Well presented, Colonel. You've won the first battle, but the war is far from over." "I'm aware, sir, but it's further than we've ever gotten before." Stanton nodded. "The 66 deploys in 4 months. That gives you very little time to prepare additional Mars units and train their maintenance personnel." "We'll be ready." "I know you will." Stanton hesitated, then added, "I spoke with Captain Reed yesterday. His recovery continues to exceed expectations. The doctors are now giving him a 60% chance of returning to limited duty before the 66 deploys." Jim absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Michael's determination was admirable, but rushing his recovery carried risks. "He's pushing too hard." "Like his father would have," Stanton observed. "Some qualities run in families." He extended his hand. "Congratulations, Colonel. You've earned this victory." As Jim left the Pentagon, he called the Rainmetal facility where the team awaited news. Ellie answered immediately, tension evident in her voice. "Jim, what happened?" "We got it. Limited deployment approved for the 66th Armor Regiment, with continued development funding pending congressional authorization." The sound of cheering erupted in the background as Ellie relayed the news to the team. When she returned to the phone, her voice carried a mixture of relief and determination. That's wonderful news. But 4 months to build additional units and train personnel? I know. It's going to be tight, but we've come too far to fail now. We'll make it happen, Ellie promised. The team's already working on improvements based on the NTC data. Jake and Hank have identified several procedure refinements that could reduce repair times by another 20%. Perfect. I'll be back tomorrow to plan the next phase. After ending the call, Jim made one more call to Rebecca Reed, sharing the news about the project approval and Michael's recovery progress. He's pushing himself beyond what the doctors recommend, Rebecca confirmed. But I've never seen him so determined. This project has given him purpose, Jim. A connection to his father that goes beyond memory. I understand, but I worry about the long-term consequences if he re-injures himself. So do I, but he's a grown man making his own choices, just like his father would have. The parallel between father and son hung in the air, a reminder of the personal stakes underlying the technical achievement. Jim had begun this journey because of Thomas Reed's death. Now, 30 years later, it was Thomas's son who embodied both the cost of past failures and the promise of future improvement. Keep me updated on his condition, Jim requested, and tell him we're proceeding with implementation for the 66th. His unit will have Mars support when they deploy. July 25th, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. The main production floor had been transformed in the weeks following the NTC demonstration. Where once a single prototype Mars unit stood, now 4 complete systems were in various stages of assembly. Engineers and technicians moved with purpose between workstations, refining components based on field performance data. Jim walked through the facility with Ellie Martinez, reviewing progress on the accelerated production schedule. 4 units for the 66th, plus 2 reserve systems, Ellie explained. The environmental hardening has been upgraded based on NTC experience. These units can now function in even more extreme conditions. How about the diagnostic systems? Layla has enhanced the software based on field data. Failure prediction algorithms are now 25% more accurate, and the user interface has been simplified for easier operation by standard maintenance personnel. They stopped at a workstation where Jake Sullivan supervised the assembly of a specialized toolkit designed for rapid transmission repairs. The new configuration saves 2 pounds of weight while adding 3 critical tools, Jake explained. Every Mars unit now includes 2 complete sets, so multiple technicians can work simultaneously. Good thinking, Jim approved. What about the training program for the 66th maintenance personnel? Hank's developing an accelerated curriculum based on what worked at NTC, Ellie replied. 3 weeks of intensive training, focusing on the most common failure modes first. Jim nodded, satisfied with the progress. Congressional funding authorization comes up for vote next week. If approved, we'll receive an additional $50 million for continued development in the next phase of deployment. And if not approved, Ellie asked carefully, then we complete the 6 units for the 66th with our remaining budget and hope their field performance is compelling enough to secure future funding. Jim's expression revealed his determination. One way or another, those units will deploy in November. As they continued their inspection, Jim's phone rang. The caller ID showed Walter Reed Medical Center. He answered immediately, concern rising. Colonel Garrison. The voice belonged to Michael Reed's doctor. I thought you should know. Captain Reed has been discharged against medical advice. He signed himself out this morning after his latest physical therapy session. Discharged, where is he going? He mentioned returning to Fort Benning to rejoin his unit for pre-deployment training. I strongly advised against it, but he was determined. Jim thanked the doctor and ended the call, frustration mixing with grudging admiration for Michael's determination. The young captain was following his father's example in the worst way, putting duty ahead of personal well-being. Problem? Ellie asked, noting Jim's expression. Michael Reed has discharged himself from Walter Reed. He's returning to his unit. Ellie's eyes widened. Is he medically cleared for duty? No, but that apparently isn't stopping him. What are you going to do? Jim considered his options. He could contact Michael's commanding officer, try to intervene, but that would undermine the young captain's authority and possibly damage his career. Nothing for now. Michael's making his own choices, for better or worse. Jim turned back to the production floor. Let's focus on making sure his unit has the Mars support they need when they deploy. That's how we can best help him. August 10, 2023, Fort Benning, Georgia. The summer heat pressed down on the training grounds as Jim approached the motor pool where Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment conducted pre-deployment maintenance on their Bradleys. He had come to Fort Benning to meet with the unit's maintenance personnel, the soldiers who would operate the Mars units when the company deployed in November. Across the concrete apron, a familiar figure caught his attention. Michael Reed stood beside a Bradley, leaning heavily on a cane as he directed maintenance activities. Though thinner than before his accident, he moved with determined purpose, supervising his soldiers with the authority of a seasoned commander. Jim watched for a moment before approaching. Michael saw him coming and straightened as much as his condition allowed. "Colonel Garrison, good to see you, sir." "Captain Reed, I wasn't expecting to find you on the line." Michael's expression tightened slightly. "I've been medically cleared for limited duty, sir. Administrative and supervisory roles only for now." They both knew it was likely an exaggeration of his medical status, but Jim chose not to challenge it directly. "How's the recovery progressing?" "Well enough. Daily PT, regular medical evaluations." Michael tapped his cane on the ground. "I'll be walking unassisted before deployment." "And your doctors support this timeline?" A flash of defiance crossed Michael's face. "My unit deploys in less than 3 months, Colonel. They need their commander." "They need a commander at full capability," Jim countered gently. "There's no shame in sitting out one rotation to ensure complete recovery." "Is that what my father would have done?" The question hung between them, charged with history and expectation. Jim considered his response carefully. "Your father would have wanted you to make the right decision for your soldiers, whether that meant going with them or ensuring they had a fully capable commander." Jim glanced at the Bradleys lined up for inspection. "He would have been proud of what you've accomplished, Michael, but he wouldn't have wanted you to risk your future out of some sense of obligation to his memory." Michael absorbed this, conflict evident in his expression. "The battalion commander has given me until September to demonstrate fitness for deployment. If I can't meet the physical requirements by then, I stay behind." "That sounds reasonable." "It is reasonable, and I intend to meet those requirements." Michael changed the subject. "I heard the Mars units for our deployment are in production. When can my maintenance personnel expect training?" "That's why I'm here. Training begins next week for your selected maintenance teams. 3 weeks intensive at Rainmetal, then continued field training here at Benning." Michael nodded with satisfaction. "Good, my XO has selected our best mechanics for the program. They're eager to get started." As they walked among the Bradleys, Michael shared details about his company's preparation for deployment. Despite his physical limitations, his command presence was evident in how soldiers responded to him, the respect in their eyes unmistakable. "Your men seem well prepared," Jim observed. "They're good soldiers, the best." Pride colored Michael's voice. "And now, thanks to Project Lazarus, they'll have support that my father's unit never had." The mention of Thomas Reed reminded Jim of a question that had been bothering him. "Michael, when did you first learn about the circumstances of your father's death? The specific vehicle failure that prevented him from reaching safety?" Michael stopped walking, using the moment to rest. "Mom told me when I was 16, after I mentioned wanting to apply to West Point. She thought I should understand the realities of military service, including how systems and equipment can fail at critical moments." "And that didn't discourage you?" "The opposite. It made me determined to be part of improving those systems, ensuring other families didn't experience what we did." Michael looked directly at Jim. "When I learned you were leading Project Lazarus, it felt like everything had come full circle. My father's friend working to prevent the same tragedy from happening again." The responsibility of that legacy weighed heavily on Jim. "We're doing everything possible to have the Mars units ready for your deployment. Congressional funding was approved yesterday, $50 million for continued development and initial fielding." "I heard. Congratulations." Michael began walking again, his gait stiff but determined. "Will you oversee the training for my maintenance personnel?" "Initially, Hank Wilson and Jake Sullivan will handle most of the hands-on instruction. They've refined the training program based on our NTC experience." "Good. I want to observe some of the sessions myself, understand the capabilities and limitations firsthand." "Of course." Jim hesitated, then added, "Michael, about your recovery, don't push too hard too fast. The Mars units will be with your company whether you deploy with them or not." Michael stopped again, his expression hardening. "With respect, Colonel, my deployment status is between me, my doctors, and my chain of command. I appreciate your concern, but I know what I'm doing." Jim recognized the tone, the same stubborn determination Thomas Reed had shown when his mind was set. Further discussion would only create resistance. "Fair enough, Captain. I'll see you next week when the training begins." As Jim departed Fort Benning, he found himself increasingly concerned about Michael's determination to deploy despite his incomplete recovery. The young captain was pushing himself beyond medical recommendations, driven by a combination of duty, personal pride, and his father's legacy. Yet Jim understood the impulse all too well. Hadn't he spent 30 years pursuing the Mars concept out of a similar sense of obligation to Thomas Reed's memory? The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable. August 20th, 2023, Rheinmetall Research Facility. The selected maintenance personnel from the 66th Armor Regiment stood at attention as Jim introduced the Mars training program. 12 soldiers representing the best of the unit's mechanical expertise, they would form the core of the deployment's forward repair capability. Over the next 3 weeks, you'll learn an entirely new approach to battlefield maintenance, Jim explained. Not just new techniques, but a new mindset. Speed over perfection, field expedient solutions over textbook procedures, keeping vehicles in the fight rather than preserving them for depot overhaul. The soldiers listened attentively as Jim outlined the program structure, the technologies they would master, and the expectations for their performance. Michael Reed sat to one side, observing without interfering, his presence lending command authority to the proceedings. Questions before we begin? A staff sergeant raised his hand. Sir, how does this system integrate with existing maintenance protocols? Are we abandoning standard procedures entirely? Good question, Sergeant. The Mars approach complements rather than replaces traditional maintenance. You'll learn when to apply rapid field repairs and when to revert to standard procedures. The goal is flexibility based on tactical necessity. Another soldier spoke up. We've heard about the NTC demonstration, sir. Is it true you repaired a completely disabled Bradley transmission in under 10 hours? We did, and with the refinements made since then, that time has been reduced to under 8 hours. You'll learn those exact procedures during this training. As the formal introduction concluded, Jim turned the soldiers over to Hank and Jake for initial diagnostic training. He joined Michael at the observation position, noting the captain's obvious fatigue despite his efforts to conceal it. Your men seem sharp, Jim observed. They are. Top performers from our maintenance section. Michael shifted in his seat, trying to find a comfortable position for his still healing body. The real test will be how quickly they adapt to the new methodology. Army mechanics are trained to follow specific procedures. The Mars approach requires more initiative, more problem solving. That's why we selected your unit for the initial deployment. Combat experienced maintenance personnel with adaptability. Michael nodded. And commanders who understand the value of rapid repair capability. He watched as his soldiers began hands-on training with the diagnostic systems. This would have saved my father, wouldn't it? The question caught Jim off guard with its directness. Based on what we know about his vehicle's damage, yes, the Mars system could have repaired it within hours, allowing safe extraction. Michael absorbed this with a composed nod. That's what I thought. He turned to Jim. I requested the complete after-action report from Desert Storm. Read everything about my father's final mission. I didn't know that was accessible to you. General Stanton authorized it, said I deserved to know the full story. Michael's expression revealed no emotion, just quiet determination. Learning the details only strengthened my commitment to this project, to ensuring its success when we deploy. Jim studied the young captain, seeing in him the same intensity that had characterized Thomas Reed. Michael, I need to ask you something directly. Are you pushing yourself to deploy because you feel it's what your father would have done? Because you need to complete what he couldn't? Michael was silent for a long moment, watching his soldiers train across the facility floor. That's part of it, he finally admitted. But it's more than that. I've trained these men for 2 years. I know their strengths, their weaknesses. They trust me to lead them into whatever we're facing. He met Jim's gaze. And yes, I feel I owe it to my father's memory to see this through, to be part of the first unit to deploy with the capability that might have saved him. Jim understood all too well. His own 30-year quest had been driven by similar motivations. A promise made at a grave, a debt owed to a fallen friend. Just be careful not to sacrifice your future out of obligation to the past, Jim advised. Your father would have wanted you to have a full career, not just one symbolic deployment. I appreciate your concern, Colonel, but I know what I'm doing. Michael straightened in his chair, visibly controlling a wince of pain. Now, shall we observe how my soldiers are progressing with the diagnostic training? Over the next 3 weeks, the maintenance personnel from the 66th immersed themselves in the Mars methodology. They learned the diagnostic systems, the specialized repair techniques, the inventory management procedures that would sustain operations in the field. Michael attended as many sessions as his recovery permitted, absorbing the capabilities and limitations of the system that would support his unit in deployment. By early September, the training had progressed to full simulation exercises, repairing deliberately damaged Bradleys under time constraints in simulated combat conditions. The soldiers had adapted well, embracing the new approach with enthusiasm once they understood its potential to save lives and preserve combat power. September 15, 2023, Fort Benning, Georgia. Jim stood with Ellie Martinez and General Stanton, watching the final certification exercise for the 66th Mars operators. The maintenance soldiers moved with practiced efficiency around a damaged Bradley, the Mars unit deployed beside it in full operational configuration. Time to operational assessment, 18 minutes, Ellie noted, monitoring the performance metrics. That's 3 minutes better than our baseline. Stanton nodded approvingly. Impressive progress. These men have embraced the concept thoroughly. They understand what's at stake, Jim replied. Their unit deploys in less than 2 months. This capability could make the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Across the training area, Michael Reed observed his soldiers' performance, moving with noticeably improved mobility. His cane remained, but he used it less frequently, his gait stronger and more confident than when Jim had last seen him. Captain Reed appears to be recovering well, Stanton observed. Better than expected, Jim agreed, though still pushing himself too hard. His battalion commander tells me he's on track for deployment clearance. Limited duty, primarily command post operations, but with the unit. Jim absorbed this news with mixed emotions. Is that wise, medically speaking? Probably not, Stanton conceded. But sometimes a soldier's determination counts for more than medical caution. Reed has demonstrated exceptional leadership throughout his recovery, maintaining command presence even while physically compromised. The certification exercise concluded successfully. The damaged Bradley returned to operational status within the target timeline. The maintenance soldiers celebrated briefly before beginning the equipment shutdown procedures they had learned during training. Michael approached the observation position, his walk measured but steady. General Stanton, Colonel Garrison, the men performed well today. Indeed they did, Captain, Stanton replied. Your unit will have 6 fully operational Mars systems for deployment, with trained personnel to operate them. That's a capability no other unit currently possesses. Thank you, sir. It will make a significant difference to our operational effectiveness. Michael turned to Jim. And thank you, Colonel, for making this happen after all these years. My father would be proud to see his vision finally implemented. Jim was struck by the phrasing. His vision? Yes, sir. In his letters home, he wrote about the need for forward repair capability, how it could transform battlefield logistics. Mom shared them with me years ago. Michael smiled slightly. Apparently, great minds think alike. He was advocating the same concept you've been developing. This revelation added yet another layer to the project's significance. Thomas Reed hadn't just been a victim of the system's failures. He had recognized the need for change, had possibly even discussed it with Jim during their service together. The memory had faded over 30 years, but the commitment had remained. I wish he could see this, Jim said quietly. So do I, but in a way, he is seeing it through us. Michael extended his hand. I received final medical clearance yesterday. I'll be deploying with my unit in November. Limited duty status, but present for command decisions. Jim shook his hand, concern mingling with respect for the young captain's determination. Congratulations. Just promise me you'll continue to follow medical guidance in the field. I will. This isn't about proving something anymore. It's about leading my soldiers effectively, using every capability at our disposal, including Mars. As the certification exercise concluded, Jim found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a promise made at a grave 30 years ago to a combat-ready system preparing for deployment. The path had been longer and more difficult than he could have imagined, but the destination was finally in sight. October 25th, 2023, the Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. Jim stood before the Army Chief of Staff in the Deployment Readiness Committee, delivering his final report on the Mars implementation for the 66th Armor Regiment. 6 complete Mars units have been delivered to Fort Benning and integrated into the unit's deployment package, he explained. 24 maintenance personnel have been fully certified on operations and procedures. Initial deployment to the designated area of operations will occur on November 15th as scheduled. The Chief of Staff nodded. Excellent work, Colonel Garrison. General Stanton informs me that the system has exceeded performance metrics during certification exercises. Yes, sir. Repair times have been reduced by an additional 15% since the NTC demonstration, and the diagnostic accuracy has improved significantly. And the limitations? Every system has them. Jim appreciated the direct question. The Mars concept is not designed for complete replacement of depot maintenance, sir. Approximately 20% of combat damage will still require traditional repair pipelines. The system is optimized for the most common battlefield failures, particularly those affecting mobility and primary weapon systems. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of logistics requirements, parts management, and operational integration. Throughout, Jim was struck by the genuine interest from senior leaders who had once dismissed the concept as impractical or unnecessary. Success at NTC and congressional approval had transformed skepticism into support. As the meeting concluded, the Chief of Staff offered a final comment. Colonel Garrison, I understand this project has been something of a personal mission for you over many years. Yes, sir, it has. Then you should take particular satisfaction in seeing it deployed. The Army is slow to change, sometimes frustratingly so. But when change comes, it often becomes permanent doctrine. I believe your Mars concept will fundamentally alter how we approach battlefield maintenance for decades to come. Thank you, sir. That's been the goal from the beginning. Afterward, General Stanton joined Jim as he prepared to leave the Pentagon. One last inspection visit to Benning before deployment, Stanton asked. Yes, final check of the Mars units and a brief with Captain Reed and his maintenance personnel. Jim gathered his materials. Will you be attending the deployment ceremony? I will. The Army Chief has asked me to represent the senior leadership. Stanton smiled slightly. Quite a change from my initial opposition, isn't it? Change is part of growth, General. You were right to demand rigorous testing and validation. The project is stronger for having met those challenges. Perhaps, but I should have been open to the concept decades ago. Stanton's expression grew serious. I spoke with Captain Reed yesterday. He's fully cleared for deployment, though still under medical monitoring. His recovery has been remarkable. Determination runs in the Reed family, Jim observed. Thomas was the same way. Once his mind was set on something, nothing could deter him. A quality that serves commanders well, within reason. Stanton extended his hand. Safe travels to Benning, Colonel. I'll see you at the deployment ceremony. November 10th, 23, Fort Benning, Georgia. The deployment ceremony for Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment, took place under clear autumn skies. Families gathered to bid farewell to their soldiers, flags snapped in the breeze, and the unit's Bradleys stood in perfect formation on the parade ground. Among them, the 6 Mars units waited, desert tan against the traditional green of the combat vehicles. Jim watched from the reviewing stand as the battalion commander addressed the assembled troops and families. Beside him sat Rebecca Reed, who had come to see her son off to deployment. Her expression was a complex mixture of pride and concern, the same look Jim had seen on countless military families over his years of service. He looks good, she said quietly, watching Michael stand with his company. The cane was gone, though a careful observer might notice the slight stiffness in his movements. Better than I expected at this stage of recovery. He's determined, Jim replied. Like his father. Yes, too much like his father sometimes. She turned to Jim. Thank you for seeing this through, for making sure Michael's unit has protection Thomas never had. Whatever happens, know that you've kept your promise. The ceremony proceeded with speeches, the battalion colors being cased for deployment, and final instructions for the soldiers. Michael led his company with calm authority, every inch the commander despite his recent injuries. When he addressed his troops, his voice carried across the parade ground with conviction. Charlie Company, in 5 days we deploy to fulfill our mission. We go prepared, trained, and equipped like no unit before us. The Mars capability represents a new era in battlefield maintenance, ensuring our fighting power remains intact even in the most challenging conditions. I am proud to lead you, confident in your abilities, and certain of our success. The soldiers responded with disciplined enthusiasm, their trust in their commander evident. Among them stood the maintenance personnel who had trained on the Mars systems, now ready to implement their skills in a combat environment. Following the ceremony, Jim joined Michael and his key leaders for a final briefing on the Mars deployment protocols. The company executive officer, first sergeant, and maintenance supervisor gathered around a tactical map in the unit headquarters. The Mars units will deploy with our primary combat elements, Michael explained. 2 systems with each of our 3 platoons. This distribution ensures maximum coverage and redundancy. Jim nodded approvingly. Good planning. Just remember that the systems require proper security during operations. They're valuable assets that enemy forces would target if identified. We've incorporated that into our defensive planning, the XO assured him. Each Mars unit will have dedicated security when deployed. The discussion continued, covering contingencies, maintenance schedules for the Mars equipment itself, and coordination with higher echelons. Throughout, Jim was impressed by the thoroughness of the planning, the integration of the new capability into existing tactical doctrine. As the briefing concluded, Michael asked his officers to give him a moment alone with Colonel Garrison. When they had departed, he turned to Jim with unexpected solemnity. I want to thank you personally, sir, not just as a company commander receiving new equipment, but as Thomas Reed's son. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. You made a promise at my father's grave 30 years ago, a promise to my mother, to me, and to his memory. You've kept that promise against all odds, against institutional resistance, against time itself. Jim was moved by the young captain's words. Your father was one of the finest officers I ever served with, Michael. He deserved better than what happened to him. Every soldier deserves better. The Mars system won't prevent all tragedies, but it will prevent some. That's enough to justify the effort. More than enough. Michael reached into his pocket, withdrawing something that glinted in the office light. My mother wanted you to have this. He handed Jim a tarnished set of captain's bars, the rank insignia Thomas Reed had worn during Desert Storm. Dad was wearing these when he died. Mom kept them all these years. Michael's voice remained steady, but emotion showed in his eyes. She thought you should carry them with you now, as a reminder of what you've accomplished. Jim accepted the bars with profound gratitude, the metal warmed from Michael's pocket. I'm honored, truly. There's something else. Michael moved to his desk, retrieving a folder. I received my deployment orders yesterday with final mission details. I'm authorized to share limited information with you due to your project's direct involvement. He opened the folder, revealing a map of a region Jim immediately recognized despite the years since he had last seen it. We're deploying to the same area where Dad's unit operated in 1991, Michael said quietly. Different conflict, different enemy, but the same harsh terrain, the same logistical challenges. History echoing itself. Jim studied the map, memories flooding back of sandstorms, extreme temperatures, and long supply lines. All the more reason for the Mars capability. That environment is brutally hard on vehicles. Exactly, which is why your timing couldn't be better. Michael closed the folder. When we deploy next week, we'll be better prepared than any unit that's entered that region before. If something happens to our vehicles, we won't be stranded like my father was. We'll have options, capabilities, a fighting chance. The symmetry was both powerful and unsettling. Thomas Reed's son deploying to the same region where his father had died, but with the very capability that might have saved him. The circle closing after 30 years. Be careful out there, Michael. The Mars system is a tool, not a guarantee. Don't take unnecessary risks because you believe you can recover from them. I won't. My first responsibility is to my soldiers, to bringing them home safely after completing our mission. Michael straightened, wincing slightly but controlling it quickly. One last thing, sir. The battalion commander has authorized a formal designation for our Mars detachment. He handed Jim a unit patch, newly created for the deployment. In the center was the traditional armor insignia, but surrounding it were the words Reed Forward Maintenance Unit and the dates 1991-2023. The battalion knows the story, sir. They know why this capability matters, who it honors, what it represents. Michael's pride was evident. Every soldier who operates these systems will wear this patch, carrying my father's legacy forward into operations. Jim was momentarily speechless, the gesture's significance overwhelming. Thank you, Michael. This means more than I can express. November 15, 2023, Fort Benning Airfield, Georgia. Dawn broke over the airfield as the deployment operations reached their final stage. Massive C-17 transport aircraft stood ready, their cargo bays open to receive the last elements of Charlie Company's equipment. The Bradleys had been loaded during the night, secured for the long flight to the area of operations. Now the Mars units were being carefully positioned for transport, their specialized components protected for the journey. Jim observed the loading process alongside General Stanton, both men present to witness this culmination of the Lazarus Project's first phase. Across the tarmac, Michael Reed supervised his company's final preparations, moving with the authority of command despite his still recovering body. He's a credit to his father, Stanton observed. Same dedication, same leadership quality. Yes, he is. Jim watched as Michael inspected each Mars unit before it was loaded, checking details personally despite having qualified personnel who could have handled the task. Though I still worry he's deploying too soon medically. Perhaps, but some missions transcend physical limitation. Stanton turned to Jim. Much like your 30-year quest to implement this capability, some would have abandoned it long ago, accepted the institutional resistance as immovable. You persisted because you understood the stakes were higher than bureaucratic concerns. I made a promise, Jim replied simply, as did I in my own way. Stanton's expression grew reflective. After Thomas Reed died, I questioned my decision to deny the forward maintenance request. Regulations supported me, risk assessment validated my choice, but the outcome haunted me nonetheless. Jim was surprised by this admission from the once implacable general. You never indicated any doubt all these years. Military leadership rarely allows for public doubt, Colonel, but it doesn't prevent private reflection. Stanton watched as the last Mars unit was secured in the aircraft. Supporting this project, ensuring its deployment with Reed's son's unit, has been my way of making amends. Not just to Thomas Reed's memory, but to all the soldiers who might have been saved by capabilities we failed to implement. The loading operations completed, and Michael approached the observation area where Jim and Stanton waited. He rendered a precise salute which both senior officers returned. All equipment secured for transport, sir. Charlie Company is ready for deployment. Excellent, Captain, Stanton replied. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished, of the unit you've built. Thank you, General. Michael turned to Jim. And thank you, Colonel Garrison, for seeing this through. Whatever happens during our deployment, know that you've fulfilled your promise completely. Jim clasped the young captain's hand firmly. Serve with honor, complete your mission, and bring your people home safely. That's all your father would have asked. I will, sir. Michael straightened, his bearing reflecting generations of military tradition. Permission to deploy, General? Granted, Captain Reed. Godspeed and successful operations. As Michael returned to his unit for final boarding, Jim fingered the tarnished captain's bars in his pocket, Thomas Reed's final rank insignia, now entrusted to his care. 30 years after making a promise at a graveside, the journey had reached its destination. The Mars capability was deploying to the very region where its need had first become evident, under the command of the son of the officer whose death had inspired its creation. The symmetry was both perfect and poignant, a circle closing after 3 decades of effort, setbacks, and perseverance. March 27, 2024, Arlington National Cemetery. Spring sunshine warmed the endless rows of white markers as Jim Garrison made his way through the cemetery. The path was familiar after countless visits over 30 years, each step bringing him closer to Section 60, Row 14, Stone 22. Major Thomas Reed, United States Army, 1961-91. Beloved husband, father, soldier. Jim stood before the grave, the fresh flowers indicating Rebecca's recent visit. In his hand, he held an envelope that had arrived the previous day, bearing military postal markings from the deployment region where Charlie Company operated. Hello, Tom, he said quietly. Thought you'd want to hear the latest news. From a nearby tree, a cardinal called, its bright sound cutting through the somber atmosphere. Jim smiled at the familiar greeting. Michael's doing well. 4 months into deployment, and Charlie Company has maintained full operational capability throughout. The Mars units have performed beyond expectations. Jim opened the envelope, removing a letter written in Michael's distinctive hand. He sent me this report yesterday. Thought you should hear it too. Jim cleared his throat and began reading aloud. Colonel Garrison, I'm writing to provide an unofficial assessment of the Mars capability in combat operations. The formal reports will follow through official channels, but I wanted to share this with you personally. 3 weeks ago, Charlie Company engaged hostile forces in the northern sector of our area of operations. During the action, 4 of our Bradleys sustained significant damage from enemy fire and IEDs. Under previous protocols, these vehicles would have been evacuated to the rear, leaving us at reduced strength for weeks or months. Instead, our Mars units deployed forward under security. Despite difficult conditions, including temperatures exceeding 120 degrees and intermittent enemy harassment, the repair teams returned all 4 Bradleys to operational status within 72 hours. Not a single soldier was lost due to reduced protection or capability. I thought of my father throughout the operation. The same desert, similar threats, but a completely different outcome because of the capability you developed. Lives were saved, Colonel. Mission effectiveness was preserved. The promise you made 30 years ago has been fulfilled in the most meaningful way possible. My recovery continues to progress well. The medical team here is excellent, and I'm now performing full duty with minimal limitations. The unit remains at high readiness, proud to be the first to deploy with this revolutionary capability. With deepest gratitude and respect, Captain Michael Reed, Commander, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment. Jim folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope. He's done you proud, Tom. Carrying forward your legacy, implementing the capabilities you advocated for, leading his soldiers with the same dedication you showed. The Cardinal called again, as if in agreement. The Army's expanding the program now. General Stanton has become its strongest advocate, pushing for Mars units across all armored formations by 2026. They're calling it the Reed Doctrine now, recognizing your early identification of the need. Jim smiled faintly. Took them 30 years to catch up to your thinking, but they finally got there. Jim knelt, placing Thomas Reed's captain's bars at the base of the headstone. I kept my promise, Tom. It took longer than either of us could have imagined, but I kept it. Your son is safe, the capability you envisioned is deployed, and soldiers are coming home who might otherwise have been lost. Standing, Jim rendered a final salute to his fallen friend. Mission accomplished, Major Reed. Rest easy. As he walked back through the cemetery, the weight of 30 years of advocacy, determination, and perseverance lifted from his shoulders. The Mars concept had moved from idea to reality, from one man's promise to institutional doctrine. Soldiers would live who might otherwise have died. Families would remain whole who might have been broken by loss. In the end, that was all that truly mattered. Not recognition, not vindication, not career advancement, just the knowledge that a promise had been kept, a wrong had been righted, and future tragedies would be prevented by the capability born from past sacrifice. Iron resolve had finally prevailed, ensuring that no warrior would be left behind again.